everybody, and welcome to Mom Cooks Fast and Slow. I'm Alex Sullivan, and I'm delighted to have you at my kitchen table. Today, I am speaking with Craig Diamond, an ambassador for Braver Angels, which is an organization dedicated to uniting people across the political spectrum. We discuss his involvement, nationwide discussions held by Braver Angels, the diverse participants, and the organization's long-term vision and goals. Craig also has a background in environmental policy, and our conversation on climate change and fossil fuels highlights the common ground found in Braver Angels discussions, making it one of my favorite episodes to date. If you'd like to get involved with Braver Angels, please see the episode notes for helpful links and emails. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Craig. Welcome to Mom Cooks Fast and Slow.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, me as well. I wanted to have you on because you are involved in the Braver Angels organization, which I discovered about a year ago, and I've, dipped my toes into some conversations in Braver Angels, but you are heavily involved. And so I thought you could come on and tell a little bit about the Braver Angels organization, what the mission is, and then, how you specifically are involved in the organization.
Sure. So, Braver Angels is basically it's a national organization, it's nonprofit, and its sole mission is to help heal the political divide in our country, which seems to be becoming worse and worse. That's the perception that we have, right? So there's several organizations out there that do this kind of thing where they try to heal political divisions. Braver Angels is probably the largest and best known of those organizations. We have chapters, or we call them alliances, in all 50 states. And we have hundreds and hundreds of active volunteers like myself, and thousands of active members. And what we do primarily is we put on workshops and other events which are highly structured and moderated. And we bring people with different views on issues together to hear each other, to respect each other, and to try to understand each other in a safe environment where we say, don't hide who you are and don't hide what you believe. And then we structure these different events and conversations so that everyone feels heard and respected. And it really works incredibly well. If you participate in some of these workshops, you can come away from them just feeling amazed at what you've learned and your ability to connect with people that you never imagined you'd be able to connect with.
Yeah, I would say that the reason I joined Braver Angels is I live in a very blue state. And to be honest, I was totally out to lunch on politics before 2020. I was like generally a libertarian, live and let live. I didn't really pay attention to much. And then 2020 happened and my brain exploded. And I felt like anytime I was raising questions about a host of issues, specifically, mask mandates and vaccine mandates revolving around my kids, but among other issues, it was met with outrage and ad hominem attacks, and there were not a lot of educated conversations happening between kind of the two sides of the equation. And so, when I saw Braver Angels, I wanted to join because, to be honest, I wanted to be heard. There was nowhere for me to be heard in kind of the area that I live in. And, that has been great for me in the few conversations I've kind of participated in is you kind of just want people to hear you, have an intellectual conversation about something, and then, you can convince or not convince someone to kind of agree or disagree with your side. But if you feel heard, it's so much easier to exist in kind of a society or a state that doesn't necessarily totally agree with where you're coming from, but you at least felt heard. So that's been kind of my experience with Braver Angels. What specifically is your role at Braver Angels, and what topics have you guys kind of discussed in Connecticut?
Sure. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell my story
Yeah, please do.
about how I got involved in Braver Angels and also how I've evolved politically over the last 3 years or so. Um, yeah, I'd say really up until I'd say like January 6th of 2021, I was a fairly typical, what one might perceive as a fairly typical liberal. I got most of my information from media that I came to realize really is very biased. But so, New York Times and the Atlantic and the New Yorker, um, um, those are the main, you know, news outlets where I got my information. And I developed over the years just so many assumptions I didn't even know I had about people and about who's right and who's wrong and who's smart and who's not, and these become assumptions that are so far back in your head that you don't even realize you have them. It's just for you. It's like, this is the way it is. And so basically on January 7th, 2021, I was talking to one of my dearest friends. We've known each other for 50 years. He is a huge conservative and Trump supporter in Indiana. We were talking on the phone, and we started to get into a big argument about what had happened the day before. And, after I ended that conversation, I hung up and I felt terrible. And I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to throw away a 50-year friendship. I mean, talking about we've known each other since kindergarten, right? Talk to each other every week. I'm not going to throw that away over this. So literally that night, I'm Jewish. So literally that night, um, sat in on I think it was a Zoom Shabbat service, listened to the rabbi. I talked to my own rabbi, and I just started thinking about things. And then from that moment on, I decided I was going to study conservatism and really, really understand conservatism and where people along the conservative spectrum are really coming from. So I read books. I changed my media diet, if you will, and I now get all kinds of different publications, both from sort of liberal side of things and from the conservative side of things. And it's been an amazing journey for me uh, because I feel so much happier, not hating and being frustrated and disgusted. I don't have any of that anymore. Now what I want to do is just bring people together,
Mm-hmm.
which is such a much happier place to be than being angry, and frustrated. So that's been great. And then Braver Angels showed up in my life a few years ago. I was looking for an organization just like this. I thought, I wonder if there's some organization that brings people together and talks about stuff, and boom, I found it. So, and my role is I'm a very active volunteer in Connecticut. I'm on what we call the Braver Angels Connecticut Steering Committee. Steering Committee is basically six of us that are very active volunteers and engage in other people in workshops and events across Connecticut. And so that's my role. I'm a part-time professor of public policy at Sacred Heart University. But my other job is basically, at this point, right now, is doing Braver Angels volunteer work because I enjoy it so much and I see so much potential in it. And yeah, so my role is part of a steering committee, which basically helps other people get involved in Connecticut.
And what conversations have you guys hosted in Connecticut so far?
So, well, before I joined, we did some workshops on critical race theory, I believe. Um, and then after I've joined, we have we did a conversation with Steve Harding, who is now state senator from the 30th district, and then also Kristen McCarthy-Vahey, who's a representative from Fairfield, a little bit of Bridgeport. And of course, Kristen is a Democrat, and Steve is a Republican, and we brought them together in a discussion with the founder of Braver Angels, named Bill Doherty. And so he, you know, had a nice conversation about how people with different political views can relate to each other. We also last year we did no, I'm sorry, earlier this year in May, we had an event at the Westport Public Library where we brought together an author named Monica Guzman, who wrote a book called How to Have Courageous Conversations. And she is leans liberal, and then brought her together with a discussion with a person named Wilk Wilkinson, who is a conservative, and he's sort of a national Braver Angels ambassador, well known, as is Monica, and then Lucy Nepothanchel from CT Public basically moderated a discussion between them, which was really wonderful. We have basically partnerships with Connecticut Public and with the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. They're called what's called our Braver Network, so we do a lot of events with them. Actually, we're doing one. We're doing one today, actually. And then, speaking of events, coming up this Saturday, we are doing a workshop on the COVID divide. And Braver Angels feels that there is just so much hurt and that's not being talked about, and trauma really from the pandemic. No matter what your opinion is about it, everyone went through some level of trauma in their life, and everybody, And so we believe that there is a really big need to get people with very different perspectives on how the government handled COVID to bring them together and have a structured conversation about it. So we're having that workshop this Saturday at the Berlin Public Library in Berlin, Connecticut. So if there's anyone listening to this before October 21st, this Saturday, perhaps you can join us there. So, and at
Yeah.
the end, I could give you, my contact information and how people can get that information.
Yeah, that would be great. I know I'm sad that I won't be able to make it, but I have gotten in touch with. There seems to be kind of a national need to have this conversation. So I don't think this is going to be the only conversation that Braver Angels hosts around, COVID
Yeah, and this is a
issues.
pilot. This is actually I should mention this is a pilot. We have one this Saturday in Connecticut, and there's one next week in Tennessee. There might be one in Ohio soon. And then we're going to learn from those pilots, and then we'd like to roll this workshop out nationally.
So
That's
that
our
kind of leads into my next question of what is the long-term goals of Braver Angels? Like it's important for people to come together and have conversations and talk about things that they don't necessarily agree on. I think by nature, Braver Angels kind of attracts people who are intellectually curious. And right now, it seems that the intellectually curious are being excluded from the wider conversation in politics. It seems we kind of hear the screaming from both sides, and we're not getting the nuance that people that join Braver Angels usually have. So, is there, a long-term vision of how Braver Angels spreads? Is there a way that Braver Angels gets involved with policymaking at the, government level? What is kind of the path, the vision, the future for this organization?
That is a fantastic question. I'm glad you asked it. Um, so our vision is to basically transform our country. In a nutshell, we feel that our country. Well, first of all, we're rooted in actually very patriotic background, meaning we want to build a movement of healing um, that's based on patriotism, on both
I love that.
sides, right? That we all love our country, um, and that we want to start with that. And um, so, yeah, we want to get involved in all parts of society. So we want to bring people together in education, both in public education and university level. We want to bring politicians together. When I say together, I'm not trying to sound like kumbaya. Together doesn't mean that you all go to a mountaintop and when I say together, I mean actually listening to each other
Hmm.
and saying, it's okay. I disagree with you. You disagree with me. Let's try to learn little nuggets from each other that we can agree on. But even if we don't agree, we respect each other, our views, and we respect each other as fellow human beings. So that's what I mean by coming together. I don't mean, it sounds so like go to summer camp. But we want to do it at the political level, at the educational level. We want to do it, in business. We want to do it in faith-based communities, and we actually have programs that we're starting to build in all of these different arenas of life, and to basically create a movement that. And you're right that that Brave Angels does tend to attract a certain kind of person. So it tends to attract people that are a little closer to the middle.
Hmm.
It also does tend to attract people that are intellectually curious. Uh, my feeling on this, my personal feeling, is that we're going to have to kind of start in that middle, grow that middle, but then also figure out a way to have that middle kind of bring in like magnets, bring in those that are a little bit to the left and right of them, or people that are a little bit angrier than the Braver Angels community is. Find a way to bring them in and grow it little by little. And I see this as a long-term thing. This is not something where next year all of a sudden we're going to be great. This is a decades-long thing, but we do see it as hopefully very transformative.
Oh, I love that. I hope that it takes off. I thought it would be a good idea to kind of show an example of how a conversation in Braver Angels goes down.
Yeah.
I saw in your background you've spent a long career in environmental policy, and I my background is in commodity trading, specifically in energy. My husband's an oil trader. I would say we are probably pro fossil fuel family. But that being said, I feel like there's a lot of things that I agree with people of your background, and the differences is where the next step is versus what the actual issues are. um so I'd like you to kind of take the lead of how the conversation would progress as a Braver Angels ambassador, and then we can kind of go from there.
Sure. So I'm going to start. So, Alex, really cool to hear that you and your husband are involved in the commodity energy trading, and that your husband currently does oil trading. So, tell me a little bit about that business. Like, what actually does he do? And I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, so he was a engineer by trade. He worked for ConocoPhillips for a long time. And he was, one of the guys that was making sure that gasoline was being made and it was being done in a safe environment. And he was the guy that was making sure your car was running. And then that moved over into working for a bank in the research sector of oil and oil products. And that's where we met. I was working on the commodity trading floor as well, and I covered all commodities. So that means agriculture, metals, as well as oil and gas. And now he works for a trade shop who moves oil and oil products around the world, and deals with all different types of countries, all different types of people, in making sure that fossil fuels are getting produced and to the places they need to get to sustain societies. America isn't the only place that uses fossil fuels. There's a lot of very poor countries that are just starting to use fossil fuels that originally were using coal and wood and much dirtier um, energy than fossil fuels are. And so that's kind of how we are both involved in that sector. We see the world from an energy perspective outside the US versus, sometimes it feels like the developed countries of Europe and the US look at it strictly from their perspective and don't take into account a lot of poorer countries that, are just starting to receive the benefits of what a world looks like with fossil fuels.
Right. Yeah, it's very different. The needs of the United States and Europe and other highly developed countries very, very different, right? Particularly from the poorer countries in the developing world. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. So you said that you mentioned that you're a quote unquote fossil fuel family or something like that. So what does that mean to you? Like when you say that, give me a little more detail about that.
Sure. So I would say that, we are not climate change denialists. I think my husband actually is very into recycling. He comes from a very, liberal family that wants clean energy, doesn't want, bad things to happen to our environment. But also, we are realists about how important fossil fuels are to our everyday lives. Every single part of our life is touched by fossil fuels, whether it's your makeup or your clothes being made, or yes, the gasoline in your car or things like that. And we would love to see the world go in a cleaner direction, but not at the expense of putting people into poverty, making gas more expensive for the average American, or, you know, turning. I mean, if you look at what happened in Sri Lanka when they tried to go all in on clean energy, it kind
Mm,
of took out their economy. Also, there are places like China and India who are still burning garbage or turning on coal plants. And, you know, to get them to use more fossil fuels instead of the dirtier fuels is actually more important than saying go straight to wind and solar power. I think there's also an argument to be made for, you know, we want things to be as cheap as possible to make a lot of people have more money in their pockets to provide for their families. And people are arguing right now that cleaner energy is getting to parity with fossil fuels, but that's only because of government intervention, which in effect means a lot of your tax money is going towards making those at
yeah,
parity. So
yeah,
is it really a parity, or, is it not? And so I think, our position is yes, let's move towards a greener world, but not at the expense of a lot of people in this world and a lot of, working class and poorer people who need fossil fuels as cheap energy right now. So I'd love to hear kind of your mirror reflection of that from an environmental policy and, a climate change perspective.
yeah. Well, I can wear several different hats in this conversation. I well, having worked on these issues and thought about them for so long, I could spend like 10 hours talking right
I'm
now.
sure. I
But
I know you're probably way more educated on this than I am.
no, I'm just trying to think of a way to respond in a way that's helpful to your listeners. You know, um, First of all, I just want to respond to what you're saying. I agree that it doesn't make sense um, to basically say, we're going to shut down every coal plant, or we're going to have every car is going to be electric by a certain amount of time, or to try to force countries to adopt technologies that they're just for whatever reason not ready to adopt. Um, I've also heard of similar situations with agriculture where I forget the countries, but there was a couple of cases where with the Green Revolution, they were trying to bring a very clean agriculture to certain countries, and they weren't ready for it, and it actually made things worse. So you do have to be careful with how you just sort of try to have the same solution for everybody. Um, Now, in terms of what you said about you don't want you want clean energy, but not at the expense of people who are in poverty and need to raise their standard of living. That is what I find so interesting about global sustainability challenges, which is if you look at global sustainability, kind of take out the politics of sustainability and wokeness and corporations and that kind of stuff. You kind of put that aside for a second. To me, the challenge of sustainability is how do you lift people out of poverty, out of suffering, in a material way without then further damaging our ecosystems um, and our environment. How do you do that? And to me, that is what sustainability is all about. That's the central question of sustainability. And so you really hit that on the nail on the head. So there are trade-offs, right?
Hmm.
Um, if you try to phase out coal and phase out oil very, very quickly, you might be doing the environment and ecosystems a favor, but you might not be doing people a favor. So there's that trade-off. And so that's what, to me, that's what global sustainability is all about. Um, you know, I'm not, in terms of climate change, I I've always believed um, in the science um, from the international organizations that do the science, IPCC. Um, but um, I actually personally want to understand it better because I do know that the science gets thrown around by people based on what their agenda is.
Hmm.
And so I haven't had the time recently, but I really wanted to figure out. I want to go look at the science myself, and I wanted to see what is it saying from my perspective. And most people don't have time to do that, but I've I do theoretically anyway have time to do that. So that's something I want to do because I think that's very important for people to dig into that science and be able to then when they hear an opinion being addressed by a journalist or a politician to say, well, it seems a little extreme to me, or well, you're not really reflecting that right, or so I do think that's a huge problem with climate change is how the science gets applied to into politics and into different situations. So that's kind of where I come at it on climate change. Um, so yeah, I guess my views are not that much different than yours.
See,
Sorry
I
to
mean, this is
sorry
such
to
a good
disappoint.
example, though, of I find a lot of Braver Angels conversations that I have result in that, like, oh, we're actually agree on so much. There's actually a ton we agree on, and there's maybe one nuance here or there that we don't. Um, but I do find a lot of these Braver Angels conversations result in that. I mean, have you found that as well?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Now, even if let's say I had my answers were very different, hopefully we could have found some common ground even in that. Um, I mean, maybe it would be as basic as, yeah, we both agree that we want cleaner energy.
Hmm.
We
Right.
both agree on that, so that's
Right.
good.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
start,
and I
right?
think the stereotype would be when someone looks at me with the husband of an oil trader or myself, trading commodities on Wall Street, it's like, oh, you deny climate change. And it's like, well, it's actually not at all what our viewpoint is, and you kind of break down that stereotype that you see. I mean, when I looked at your background before we had this conversation, I was like, oh, he's probably,
Mhm.
gluing himself to a painting somewhere on the weekend.
Uh, that's funny. So,
um,
yeah, that's perfect. That's why having these kinds of conversations is so important.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, I'm not a tree hugger, although my wife likes to tell the story that on our second date, actually, we were in California and we were going on a hike with the redwoods and actually hugged a tree because if anyone's done that, they're actually very soft. The bark is, so I hugged a tree. But anyway, but no, I'm not a tree hugger at all. I look at this very much from a business perspective. I've actually taught business sustainability and studied it. I've led community-wide efforts to build sustainability programs in communities. Um, and I'm so interested in business and sustainability because it really gets to um, what is the role of business and what's the role of government, what's the role of activists in environmental issues. So I take a very high level and I think pretty balanced view. Um, I guess where I maybe more come down on the liberal side of things is that I do worry a lot that my children and grandchildren may inherit a big mess. Um, I don't know what that mess is going to look like. I don't think anyone really knows what that mess is going to look like. But not just climate change, but you just look at global ecosystem and natural resource problems. There's a lot of problems, and
Hmm.
the thing that I like to tell you about is a long time ago, where this thing came out of Europe, this idea called the natural step, and the natural step basically talked about this the science behind how long can you dig stuff up from the Earth's core, do stuff with it, and then throw it away above the Earth's crust. How long can that go until you either run out of the stuff that you dig up from beneath the Earth's crust, or how long you can go before that stuff that's now out above the Earth's crust starts to really degrade
Hmm.
either public health or animal or ecosystem health. Or so, if you think about it in that way, either way, we need to change, right? Because either we're
Hmm.
going to run out of stuff that we desperately need, because it doesn't renew, right? Zinc doesn't renew, and coal doesn't renew, and fossil,
Yeah.
oil doesn't renew. None of these
Lithium,
stuff,
lithium doesn't renew either,
nothing renews.
which,
So we
yeah.
take it all up, and we have great stuff, but then it's like, okay, now what? And then also, okay, we've got a lot of this bad stuff floating around in the environment, a lot of poisonous stuff. So I like to think of it that way too. Is we're really heading towards a problem, but I also understand sort of the more conservative view is like, hold on, take a deep breath. Don't go. Really look at the science. Try to look at the science objectively. And let's talk to each other.
Hmm.
People that want to take a slower view. This would be the mom cooks slow, right?
Yes.
Uh, so let's take a slower, the slow view. Let's take a deep breath, and then there's like the activists, like, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. Let's see if we can like bring those two perspectives together, because the reality is those are the two perspectives, at least in this country, that there are.
Right.
So you can't deny that half people want maybe going a little slow, and half the people are freaked out. Okay, but you're not going to change each other, but you can come together, and you
Right.
can come together with some solutions that reflect like a nice soup of different people's perspectives, and move forward in a positive way, as
Right.
opposed to just fighting each other all the time.
Viewpoint diversity is
Yeah,
big
yeah,
winner in all of this.
right.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Craig.
Yeah.
So, how is best for people to get involved with Braver Angels? I mean, I discovered Braver Angels through Coleman Hughes's podcast. And so I kind of just Googled it and figured it out. But, specifically, I guess, to Connecticut, but in general, what's the best way for people to reach out and find Braver Angels?
Yeah, so I think the best way is I can just give you my email. People can reach out to me, or I'll give you the Connecticut Brave Angels website
Great. I'll
URL.
include
And then,
those in the notes in the
yeah,
episode.
so my email is cdiamond@braverangels.org, and the Connecticut Brave Angels website is ct.braverangels.org.
Great.
That's probably the
And
best way to get involved, and I'd say you could start just by looking, maybe participating in some of the events online, um, or people are happy to email me. Happy to talk to them about it, or hook them up with people who they may want to talk to about it. So yeah, that's how I would suggest getting started.
okay, great. And to conclude this episode, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everyone because I think the most important thing is family and community, and organizations like Braver Angels trying to bring people together is a great example of community building. So, what is your favorite family tradition and why?
So you're going to like this one.
Okay.
My favorite family tradition is Passover,
Okay.
um, and because we do it every year. Now the "we" has changed over the years as grandmothers and great grandmothers have passed away, and it, every time there's a loss like that, kind of things shift a little bit, and how we do things and
Hmm.
where and with who, it kind of shifts. But there's always been Passover for me in my life, and I love it because it brings our family members together. We sit around the table. We engage in traditions that are thousands of years old.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I love the food traditions, and I also enjoy talking about the how the messages of Passover apply to current our current world. And I usually lead the seders. My grandmother used to do that, and now I do it. And I like to stop and say, okay, what's the lesson here? This thing was going on 3,000 years ago. What's the lesson for today? Not just for Jewish people, but for our world. And so those are some of the reasons why I really um, enjoy Passover. Definitely my favorite family tradition.
I love that. I love it. Well, that's
Probably not
wonderful.
food's probably not as good as Italian.
Well,
Uh,
I'm from Long Island, so Long Island, you're
oh,
either Jewish or Italian. You're all the same. It's all the
it's
same. It's
true. It's very
same. What
true.
do they say? Like same mom, different food, something like that.
It's true. It's like eat, 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 eat.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And we all have way too much to say to everyone.
yeah. No, I'm Italian from Long Island. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, great. Well, Craig, thank you so much for coming on. And I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate Braver
likewise.
Angels. And I look forward to seeing what the, organization has to offer going forward. So I'm excited.
Thank you. And I just wanted to mention that if anyone's interested in that workshop coming up this Saturday, feel free to email me, and I can send you some information on it.
Great. Perfect. All right. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Just a note at the end of this episode. I had a house full of family this week for my nephew's first birthday, so I wasn't able to get this episode released in time to sign up for the Saturday discussion Craig mentions. But please reach out if you're interested in learning more.